They say you never forget the moment your life changes forever. For me, it wasn't when I discovered my wife's affair, or even when I learned she planned to kill me. It was the moment I first met her, when Grace Anderson spilled hot coffee all over my favorite white shirt. I remember everything about that morning. The busy coffee shop, the scent of espresso, the way she rushed through the door like a whirlwind in a red dress. Then chaos. Hot liquid, a startled gasp, and those green eyes looking up at me in mortification. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Her hands fluttered over my ruined shirt. I'm Grace, and I'm already having the worst first day. Connor Nelson, I said, surprising myself by smiling. And you can make it up to me by buying me dinner. That's how it started. One ruined shirt and an impulsive dinner invitation. How could I have known that same impulsiveness would later make her plan my murder? Grace wasn't like any woman I'd ever met. Where I calculated risks, she jumped without looking. Where I planned, she acted on instinct. She was chaos incarnate, and I was completely mesmerized. You're insane, I laughed one night, watching her climb onto a bar in her cocktail dress during our engagement party. That's why you love me, she whispered, pulling me up beside her. Life's too short to be boring. I should have recognized the warning signs even then. The way she craved excitement, the constant need for something new, something more. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? Our wedding was anything but traditional. Grace walked down the aisle in a black dress that made my mother nearly faint. We exchanged vows at midnight on New Year's Eve, surrounded by fire dancers and champagne fountains. A black wedding dress? My sister whispered, scandalized. Grace just winked and lifted her hem to reveal crimson stilettos. You're incredible, I murmured during our first dance. Crazy, but incredible. Careful, she teased, her lips brushing my ear. The crazy ones are the most dangerous to fall in love with. I should have listened. The first 2 years of marriage were a whirlwind. Grace quit her marketing job on impulse to start her own firm. I nearly had a heart attack. We'd just gotten a mortgage, but she already had 2 clients lined up. That was Grace. Act first, explain later. Somehow, it always worked out. When she decided we needed to go skydiving for our anniversary, I didn't even argue anymore. I'd learned to trust her wild ideas, to let her pull me out of my comfort zone. She made life an adventure. Promise you'll never try to tame me, she whispered one night, tracing the tattoo she'd gotten on our honeymoon after 2 mini margaritas. Never, I promised, kissing her shoulder. You'd be boring if you were tame. She laughed, but something flickered in her eyes, a restlessness I'd learned to recognize too late. We bought our dream house in the suburbs 3 years in. Grace filled the garden with roses and herbs, while I built her a reading nook in the bay window. We hosted dinner parties, planted trees, made plans for a family. The neighbors think I'm having an affair, she laughed one evening on our porch swing. Mrs. Peterson saw me sneaking out at midnight last week. You were setting up my surprise birthday party, I chuckled, pulling her close. I know. But she saw a woman in black sneaking around and jumped to conclusions. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Maybe I should play it up, add some mystery to our quiet little suburb. I kissed her neck. Don't you dare. I have enough trouble keeping up with one version of you. If I'd been paying attention, I might have noticed how she tensed at those words, might have caught the shadow that crossed her face. But I was still drunk on her wild beauty, still believing our love was enough. You never have to worry about me, she said softly, but her fingers drummed restlessly against my chest, a tell I'd learned to recognize too late. I'm exactly where I want to be. I believed her. God help me. I believed every word. That was the thing about Grace. She could tell the most beautiful lies. And I, the steady, sensible structural engineer, had built my entire life on her shifting foundation. Looking back now, I wonder if she was already planning her escape even then. If every impulsive act, every wild adventure, was just her testing the boundaries of what she could get away with, training me to accept her unpredictability so I wouldn't question it when it really mattered. But that's the thing about hindsight. It's always perfect. And love? Love is the perfect blindfold. If someone had told me then that my beautiful, crazy Grace would one day plot my murder, I would have laughed. If they'd said the woman who kissed me awake each morning would eventually spike my coffee with poison, I would have called them insane. But that's the problem with loving a tornado. Eventually, everything gets destroyed. I remember the exact moment everything began to change. It was a sweltering August morning, and I was watching Grace tend to her roses from our kitchen window. That's when the moving truck pulled up next door. Our new neighbor emerged from his BMW, tall, dark-haired, with what my sister would later call movie star looks. I watched as Grace straightened up, pulling off her gardening gloves. Even from a distance, I could see her entire demeanor shift. "We should invite him for dinner," she said that evening, watching me grill steaks. "He's all alone in that big house." I agreed, not thinking much of it. That was my first mistake. The dinner party was Grace's idea, of course. I came home to find her wearing that black dress, the one that hugged every curve, the one she usually saved for special occasions. "Bit fancy for a neighbor dinner, isn't it?" I asked. She gave me that smile, the one that still made my heart skip. First impressions matter. Mark Anderson arrived with expensive wine and charm to spare. Divorced architect, he told us, looking for a fresh start. But I noticed how his eyes followed Grace's every movement, how they lingered a bit too long when she wasn't looking. "So why settle in suburbia?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Needed a change after my divorce." He swirled his wine, eyes meeting Grace's, looking for something real. The electricity in that glance should have set off alarm bells. Instead, I poured more wine. The changes were subtle at first. Grace started wearing perfume to get the mail. She spent hours in the garden, visible from Mark's home office window. Her phone stayed face down on tables. "Just catching up on work," she'd say when I asked about her late nights. But I noticed she turned right out of our subdivision, away from her office's direction. One night, I woke at 2 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. Through the window, I saw lights on at Mark's house. When she slipped back into bed 20 minutes later, she smelled of night air and someone else's cologne. "Sorry," she whispered, thinking I was asleep. "Drinks with the team ran late. Did you get my text?" I hadn't received any text. That was the first direct lie. The neighborhood block party brought everything into sharp focus. Grace wore a red sundress that made heads turn. She laughed too loud at Mark's jokes, touched his arm too often. My best friend James pulled me aside. "Connor, man, are you seeing this?" "She's friendly with everyone," I said, but my stomach was turning to ice. Later, I found them in the kitchen. They sprang apart when I entered. Grace's cheeks flushed. "Just getting more ice," she said brightly. But I'd seen Mark's hand drop from her waist. The changes accelerated. Yoga classes 3 times a week. Constant work emails that made her phone buzz. New lingerie I never saw her wear. One morning, I found a receipt in her car. The Grand Hotel, downtown. Lunch for 2. Dated during her supposed client meeting. "How was Romano's last night?" I asked over breakfast, watching her face. "For the client dinner?" "Oh, amazing," she replied without hesitation. "You should try their new seafood pasta." My coffee cup nearly cracked in my grip. Romano's had been closed for renovations all week. When I finally confronted her about the late nights, she straddled my lap like old times, kissing me deeply. "You're the only one for me, baby. Always." I wanted to believe her. But that night, I saw them in the garden, illuminated by Mark's porch light. They weren't touching, weren't even very close. But the way they looked at each other, I knew that look. It was how Grace used to look at me. "I think I'll skip the neighborhood barbecue this weekend," I said casually. "Big project due Monday." "You can't." Her reaction was too quick, too intense. "I mean, everyone's expecting you. Mark's grilling his famous ribs. Mark this, Mark that." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Should I be worried?" She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." That night, her phone lit up beside me. Just a glimpse before she snatched it away. "Miss you already. Tomorrow same time?" The sender's name was Work Client M. I lay awake all night, my mind racing. Next to me, Grace slept peacefully, a small smile on her lips. Was she dreaming of him? I remembered her words from our early days. The crazy ones are the most dangerous to fall in love with. She'd been wrong about that. The most dangerous ones are those who can lie with a smile, who can kiss you goodnight while planning to meet their lover tomorrow. I just didn't know yet how dangerous my Grace could really be. I sat in my parked car outside the Grand Hotel, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Grace's car was there, parked next to Mark's black BMW. My phone buzzed, a text from my wife. Working late again. Don't wait up. Love you. Red heart. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. 20 minutes later, they emerged. I watched through my windshield as Grace checked the street before kissing him. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to take photos. Evidence. I needed evidence. That evening, Grace came home smelling of his cologne, her lipstick slightly smudged. How was work? I asked, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. Exhausting. These clients are so demanding. She headed straight for the shower. I picked up her discarded blouse, inhaling Mark's scent. 6 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to me, smelling my wife's clothes for proof of her betrayal. You need to confront her, James insisted the next day, pacing my office. Not yet. I ran my hands through my hair. I need more proof first. You don't know how convincing she can be. The hotel photos aren't enough? For divorce? Sure. But something feels wrong, James. Really wrong. If only I'd known how right I was. That weekend, I told Grace I had a business trip. Instead, I parked down the street, watching my own house like some pathetic private investigator. Mark arrived within an hour of my departure. Through the windows, I saw them in our kitchen. Our fucking kitchen. Grace hopped onto the counter, pulling him between her legs. They were drinking wine from my favorite glasses, laughing like teenagers. I filmed everything, my hands shaking with rage. But it was about to get much worse. The real revelation came through sheer luck. Or maybe fate has a twisted sense of humor. Grace had asked to use my phone to call her mother. Her battery was dead, she claimed. She forgot to log out of her messaging app. A notification popped up. Miss you already. Can't wait for tomorrow. Same time? My thumb hovered over the message. One click, and I'd see their entire conversation history. Did I want to know? Could it be worse than what I'd already discovered? It was so much worse. We need to be careful, Grace had written. He's getting suspicious. Don't worry, baby. Once it's done, we'll have the insurance money and each other. The pills I got will make it look like a heart attack. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning to kill me. I forwarded everything to my email, then deleted the evidence. When Grace returned, I handed her the phone with a smile that felt like broken glass. Mom says hi, she said, kissing my cheek. That's nice, honey. That night, I held her close, fighting the urge to confront her, to scream, to shake her, to ask how she could sleep beside the man she was planning to murder. But I kept quiet. I had a better plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part perfectly. I complained of occasional chest pains. Started taking vitamin supplements ostentatiously at breakfast. Even mentioned updating my life insurance. I watched them exchange glances at the neighborhood potluck, their secret smiles now loaded with new meaning. I noticed how Grace's hand lingered on Mark's arm, how they always seemed to end up in the kitchen together. Are you feeling okay? Grace would ask, her concern so perfectly feigned. You look pale. Just tired, I'd reply, watching her watch me, wondering if tonight was the night she'd try to kill me. I saw them through Mark's window one evening, measuring something into a small vial. Just a few drops each time, he was saying. Gradual is better. More natural. Grace looked nervous. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. Trust me. I backed away silently, my mind racing. The woman I'd built my life around, the one I'd promised to love forever, was measuring out my death in careful drops. That night, Grace cooked my favorite meal, honey-glazed salmon with roasted vegetables. She'd been doing that more often lately. Such a caring wife, making her husband's favorite dishes in his final days. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, she said, touching my cheek. I forced a smile. Till death do us part, right? She didn't catch my bitter tone. She never was good at picking up subtleties, my wild, impulsive Grace. always too focused on the end game to notice the details. But details were my specialty, and I was about to teach my wife a lesson about patience, planning, and the danger of underestimating quiet men. Because while Grace was playing house with her lover and plotting my death, I was plotting something too, and I've always been better at playing the long game. I sat in Detective Martinez's office, sliding the evidence across her desk, photos, text messages, recordings. My hands were steady now. I'd moved past shock into something colder. "You understand how dangerous this is?" she asked, reviewing the files. "Playing along could get you killed." "I'm already dead in their minds," I replied. "Might as well make it count." She studied me for a long moment. "Most men would run." "I'm not most men." I leaned forward. "And she's not getting away with this." That evening, Grace brought me coffee in bed, a new habit she developed recently. "You're too good to me," I smiled, taking a sip before secretly emptying most of it into the plant when she turned away. "I just want to take care of you," she said, watching me intently, "especially with these heart problems you've been having." I wondered if she could see the irony dripping from her words like poison. The hidden cameras were Detective Martinez's idea. Every room, every angle, recording everything. I watched the footage at work, Grace and Mark in our kitchen, measuring poison into vials. Grace practicing her concerned wife act in the mirror. Their passionate encounters on my couch. "Jesus Christ," James whispered, watching over my shoulder. "She's a psychopath." "No," I corrected him. "She's just Grace. Wild, impulsive, destructive Grace. I just never thought she'd destroy me." I started leaving my phone unlocked, knowing she'd check it. Let her see my searches, heart attack symptoms, updating life insurance, chest pain causes. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Grace suggested, concern perfectly painted on her face. "Probably nothing," I said, clutching my chest for effect. "Just stress." Over her shoulder, I saw Mark in his garden, watching us through the window. They were so obvious now that I knew what to look for. The next phase was trickier. I had to make them believe their plan was working without actually ingesting their poison. "You're not eating much," Grace noted one evening, serving my favorite meal again. "Not hungry." I pushed the food around, then clutched my chest, actually feeling a bit dizzy. The flash of excitement in her eyes made me sick. She pulled out her phone immediately after dinner. "It's working." First dose taking effect. I imagined her with Mark, celebrating their progress toward my death. It gave me the strength to continue the charade. Detective Martinez called with updates. The poison they bought? High-end stuff. Untraceable in small doses. "Your wife's quite the researcher." "She always was thorough," I said, remembering how she used to plan our adventures with the same attention to detail. "When do we move?" "Not yet. We need them to attempt it properly. One more week." I hung up as Grace's key turned in the door. "Showtime." "The doctor wants to run some tests," I told Grace over dinner. "Something about my heart rhythms being irregular." "Oh, honey." She touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. "I'm worried about you." "I've updated all our paperwork," I continued. "Insurance, will, everything. Just in case." The gleam in her eyes was predatory now. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. "At least I know you'll be taken care of," I added. She hugged me, and over her shoulder, I saw Mark watching through our kitchen window. Always watching, always waiting. Like vultures circling their dying prey. But I wasn't dying. I was hunting. That night, I found Grace crying in our bathroom. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I knew. The cameras had caught her conversation with Mark earlier. "I can't take much more of this pretending. Just a little longer, baby. Then we'll be together forever. Just scared of losing you," she whispered now, her tears looking almost real. I held her, wondering how many times she'd practiced this scene in the mirror. "I'm not going anywhere." Her hands tightened on my shirt. "Promise." "Till death do us part," I replied, and felt her shiver. The endgame was approaching. I could feel it in Grace's increasing nervousness, in Mark's more frequent visits, in the way they both watched me at dinner. "One more week," Detective Martinez had said. But looking at my wife's beautiful, treacherous face across the dinner table, I knew it would be sooner. Grace was getting impatient, She always did. Her wild heart couldn't stand the slow burn of careful plans. More wine, she offered, reaching for my glass. Always, I smiled, raising it in a toast. To us. Our glasses clinked, and I saw my future in the blood-red liquid. But it wasn't the future Grace and Mark had planned. Because while they were playing at murder, I was playing a longer game. And Grace was about to learn that the quiet ones, the patient ones, the planners, we're the most dangerous of all. I lay in bed, pretending to sleep while Grace made a call from our bathroom. Tonight. I can't wait any longer. Yes, I know we should be careful, but he's getting worse. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Yes, I can get them from your house now. I pressed the recording button on my phone, my hand steady. Detective Martinez's words echoed in my mind. We're ready when you are. It was time. Grace outdid herself that evening. Candles, wine, my favorite music playing softly. A perfect last meal for her dying husband. Your favorite, she said, serving the salmon. With that special sauce you love. I watched her pour the wine, noticed her hand shake slightly. She didn't pour one for herself. Not drinking. I asked, knowing the answer. Headache. The lie came smoothly. But you enjoy. I raised my glass. To us. To love. To trust. Something flickered in her eyes. To us, she whispered. The moment she turned to get dessert, I switched our plates. Amateur move, really. She should have known I'd watch her hands. She taught me that herself, years ago. Always watch the hands, baby. That's where the magic happens. I took a bite, then another. Grace watched me intently, her fingers drumming on the table, that old nervous tell. Everything okay? I asked. Perfect. Her voice cracked slightly. How's the food? Delicious. I took another bite, then started my performance. Though, something feels. I clutched my chest, gasping. Grace stood quickly. Connor? I stumbled from my chair, collapsing onto the floor. Through slitted eyes, I saw her pull out her phone. It's happening, she whispered. Come quickly. Minutes later, Mark burst in through the back door. Is he? Not yet. Grace's voice was shaking. The poison should work soon. Check his pulse, Mark ordered. As Grace bent down, my hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Her scream pierced the air. Surprise, honey. The house erupted in chaos. Police burst through every door. Detective Martinez led the charge, gun drawn. Police. Hands where we can see them. Mark tried to run but was tackled in the hallway. Grace stood frozen, staring at me as I stood up, perfectly fine. How? She whispered. I switched our plates when you went for more wine. I couldn't keep the ice from my voice. The poison you meant for me. You just ate it. Grace's eyes widened in horror. Her hand flew to her throat. Don't worry, I said coldly. It was just Ipecac. Enough to make you sick, not kill you. Unlike what you had planned for me. Detective Martinez was reading them their rights as Grace sank to her knees, retching. Why? I asked softly. Was I not enough? Grace looked up, mascara running. I don't know. The excitement, the danger. Mark made me feel alive. And killing me? Was that exciting too? She started crying. He said it was the only way we could be together. The insurance money? Save it for court. Detective Martinez interrupted, cuffing her. Hours later, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of our ruined dinner. The candles still burned, mocking the romance Grace had staged for my murder. James called. It's done. It's done. They're both in custody. Full confession. You okay? I looked at our wedding photo still hanging on the wall. Grace in her black dress, me looking at her like she hung the moon. No, I said honestly. But I will be. At the station, Grace asked to see me one last time before processing. I did love you, she said through the cell bars. In my way. Your way, I replied, involves too much poison for my taste. I turned to leave, then paused. You were wrong, you know. That night you said the crazy ones are the most dangerous to love. Oh, the quiet ones who plan ahead. We're much worse. I walked away, leaving my wild, beautiful, toxic Grace to face the consequences of her games. Sometimes I realized the most dangerous prey is the one you think you've already caught. And sometimes the man you're trying to kill is already 3 steps ahead of you, watching you dig your own grave. Grace had always loved playing games. She just never realized she wasn't the only player who could win. 3 months after the arrest, I took the stand in the county courthouse. Grace sat at the defendant's table, orange jumpsuit replacing her signature red dresses. Mark slouched beside her, both of them shadows of their former polished selves. "Mr. Nelson," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about the events leading up to October 15th. I delivered my testimony like a report on structural integrity, clinical, detached, precise. Each word another nail in their coffins. I watched Grace flinch as I described finding their messages, discovering their plot, gathering evidence while they plotted my death. And why didn't you go to the police immediately?" "Because I needed them to reveal their true intentions," I replied, meeting Grace's eyes. "My wife was very good at lying. I needed irrefutable proof." Mark broke first, predictably. Turned on Grace the moment his lawyer mentioned reduced sentences. Her face when he testified against her was almost worth the price of admission. "She planned everything," he claimed. "The poison was her idea. She said it had to look natural." I watched Grace's mask crack, saw the wild, dangerous light in her eyes. She'd trusted him, and he'd betrayed her. Irony has a sense of humor after all. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Attempted murder. 25 years for Grace, 18 for Mark. As they led her away, she caught my eye one last time. For a moment, I saw my Grace again. The woman who'd spilled coffee on me, who'd danced on bars, who'd made me feel alive. Then she was gone. 6 months later. "The dreams are getting better," I told Dr. Peterson, my therapist. "Less frequent." "And the house?" "Sold." I smiled slightly. Couldn't sleep there anyway. Too many ghosts. "The letters?" I glanced at the stack of unopened envelopes from the prison. Grace wrote weekly, each letter another attempt to explain, to apologize, to manipulate. "Still haven't read them," I admitted. "Not sure I ever will." There's no wrong way to heal, Connor. 1 year later, I was leaving the coffee shop when someone bumped into me, hot liquid splashing across my shirt. Oh my God. A woman with copper hair started dabbing at my chest. "I'm so sorry. I'm Rachel, and I'm having the worst day." I stepped back, heart pounding. The scene was too familiar, the words too close. Outside, I called James. "It happened exactly like with Grace," I said, pacing. "The coffee, the lines, everything." "Or maybe," he said gently, "some things just happen by chance. Not everything is a trap, Connor." 2 years later. The prison visiting room was cold. Grace had lost weight, her wild beauty tamed by institutional living. "You came," she said softly, "to sign the divorce papers." I placed them on the table. "And to say goodbye." "Connor, please." "I'm not here for explanations or apologies. Just closure." "I dream about you," she whispered. "About us. The good times." "The good times were lies, Grace." "Not all of them." Her eyes held mine. "You made me feel safe. And you tried to kill me." She looked down. "I never deserved you." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." 3 years later. Rachel waited in our favorite restaurant, nervous energy radiating off her. She was everything Grace wasn't. Steady, honest, predictable. Maybe that's why I loved her. "I need to tell you something," I said. "About my ex-wife." I told her everything. The affair, the murder plot, the arrests. My trust issues, my therapy, my fears. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she finally said. "For what?" "For trusting me enough to tell me." She reached across the table, took my hand. "That's all I need." 5 years later. The news alert flashed on my phone. Local woman dies in prison. Grace had succeeded where her murder plot had failed. A prison fight had done what poison couldn't. Rachel found me in the garden, staring at nothing. "Grace is dead," I said simply. She held me, asking the question everyone would ask. "How do you feel?" I thought about the wild girl who'd spilled coffee on me, the passionate woman who'd stolen my heart, the cold killer she'd become. Free, I replied. Finally free. That night, I took out the stack of unopened letters from Grace. One by one, I fed them into the fire, watching our past turn to ash. Some love stories end in heartbreak. Some end in betrayal. Mine ended in murder plots and prison sentences. But standing there with Rachel, watching Grace's letters burn, I realized something. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the ugliest endings. And sometimes, surviving is the sweetest revenge of all.